You're listening to Achtung Millwall.
Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to a very special edition, a tribute to a major figure in football, Theo Foley, who sadly passed away this week. A major figure in football, a major figure in Millwall history too. And to do a little consideration of Theo's contribution to the game and the Lions generally, I'm joined by a regular contributor, Neil Andrews. Welcome to the show, Neil.
Morning.
And Theo Foley, I mean, he's probably a lesser known name in some ways, but we had two standout seasons with Theo as an assistant manager. So it's an awkward role being assistant, isn't it? You play a vital part in a side, and yet you don't get any of the glory. I'm thinking of the 75-76 season here and the Gordon Jago, which was promotion season, great season from my own personal memory, and then also 1984-85 under George Graham. A vital cog in two fantastic seasons for the Lions.
Yeah, it's quite strange, isn't it? That you've got an assistant manager who worked under two different managers, because normally they go wherever the manager departs, and they kind of travel around with them, don't they? So I know Theo ended up following George Graham around quite a bit, especially later in his career. But to have that achievement, I think is quite remarkable. I'm trying to think of any other kind of assistant manager who's worked under two very successful managers, and no names readily spring to mind. But you always think of Brian Clough, and obviously
Peter Taylor.
Peter Taylor as kind of the epitome of the assistant manager. Who's the bedrock of the manager's performances, and obviously the manager's success as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is quite an achievement. And I've just done a little bit of research, obviously, for the show listeners. And I was actually struck by Theo's achievements in the game because, we tend to look at life through a Millwall prism on this show. I hadn't realised, Neil, that as a player, he'd played for Northampton Town in the kind of early to mid-60s. During a fantastic run of form for Northampton. They actually went from the 4th division to the 1st division, which again, it's, people talk about Wimbledon in the 80s, but that was a huge achievement for a small town club, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of long forgotten that Northampton Town actually made the top flight. I think they were in the top flight the year England won the World Cup. And was he captain? I was right in thinking he was captain, but he also
captain and centre half, I believe.
Yeah, and he was also capped by the Republic of Ireland as well. But then, kind of injury curtailed his career. But yeah, it's kind of one of those things when it's like all assistant managers, isn't it? You sometimes forget just what a good playing career they had. I mean, it's the same with Brian Clough actually. Fantastic goal scoring record. England international, but people forget about that. Well, unless you've seen the film The Danish United, you forget about that. Some of these, players had very successful careers. I mean, even George Graham to a certain extent. I know he was kind of seen as. I think someone once called him the Nietzsche of Man United when he went there, which I think was a bit generous. But it's one of those kind of things that you kind of forget about. But because I always remember the memory of Theo Foley at Millwall that sticks out was a kind of testimonial memorial game for, is it Gordon Borland, who was the club secretary who died. Yeah. And they had an England game. It was going to be a celebration, and he died 2 weeks beforehand. But Millwall played an England select 11 during the season and played the England team. But beforehand, they had a kind of managers and coaches versus ex-players. And there was a photo in the programme of Theo Foley with Harry Cripps, on opposite sides of the teams, as it were. And that way stuck out because, going through your old programmes, it's like you had the promotion season obviously then as well, but it used to pop up on TV programmes like The Big Match and radio. And you always remember, or I always do, anyone that ever had a connection with Millwall, you always think, oh yeah. And being young, I always thought you played for Millwall because of that photo, rather than just being assistant manager. And it was only kind of when I was about 13, 14, I realised that he never actually played, but, had a key role on the backroom staff, should we say.
Yeah, I mean, born in Dublin, 1937, his Irish club originally was a team called Home Park. I don't know if they still exist in I presume, a Dublin side.
I've got a funny feeling Dave Savage came from Home Park, or was it Home Farm?
It's one of those names that you kind of hear, but I don't know enough about Home Park to comment.
We've definitely had another player in recent years from Home Park.
I know Sadlier came from St Patrick's, I believe, which is another Dublin side. Theo crossed the Irish Sea, as they put it, and took in such diverse clubs as Exeter City, then Northampton, where he enjoyed probably his biggest playing success. I mean, to captain a team from Division 4 into Division 1 is... this was playing at the old cricket ground, the county ground in Northampton. It's a strange... you can't imagine a team doing that in the modern world. I mean, I suppose Wimbledon being a classic example, but to be playing on a cricket pitch effectively and to make that journey is captained by Theo Foley, known for his robust tackling, which I think was what eventually would cost him his playing career, Neil. I think he injured his knee and that also cost him his international place as well.
Yeah, but football was a different world back then, isn't it? We always seem to, everyone's guilty of looking back with modern vision, as it were, or a modern perspective. Football was a different landscape back then. Teams could go to places like Exeter City and lose, and go to Northampton and lose. And teams like Northampton and Exeter City could have a very bedded-in team that could actually perform as a team and go through the leagues. It's very unlikely it would happen these days unless you put lots of money in, like Wigan to a certain extent. But back then, players would. Journeyman's probably the wrong title, but clubs would offer the same wages. So, players could pick and choose where they wanted to live, kind of thing. So it was kind of a different world, but these teams were always competitive on their day.
Yeah, I mean, there's a wonderful photo. You might have seen it online during his Northampton days. Theo set up a pie shop. I think it's a chicken pie shop.
Yeah.
Which is a great image of a professional footballer for a successful side. I know Northampton won't be one of the glamour names, but he's having to supplement his income, or maybe think about a career post football, because it's always fragile as an existence. Running his own chicken pie shop in Northampton. You can't imagine players doing any such thing nowadays, but there it was. That was the nature of the game in those times, wasn't it?
Yeah, he wasn't alone, was he?
No.
Malcolm MacDonald had his own gentleman's outfitters in Newcastle, didn't he? I know Bobby Moore had his sports shops. I think Jeff Hurst had sports shop. Everyone had a second line, especially during summer. I remember the famous story of Ray Clements used to stack deck chairs, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right.
Pier during the summer. So they all had kind of their secondary income to supplement their meagre wages as a footballer.
I'm sure, and I asked Brian King about this when I had the fortune to speak to him during the height of the lockdown. I'm sure I remember, maybe some listeners out there can diverging subjects here slightly, but I'm sure I remember Harry Cripps and Dennis Burnett setting up a paraffin home delivery service, and I remember it being mentioned in the Matchday programme. This would be very early 70s.
Yeah, that rings a bell. Yeah,
but if anyone can confirm that, I'd love to. I'd love to have that memory confirmed, because I'm kind of half worried that I've constructed it in my head. But
I think the last one I remember advertising in the programme was Tony Witter at QPR, when he used to advertise his electrician services.
Different times. But Northampton Town, Theo was played there from 61 to 68, and he's moved on to Charlton Athletic. I think he played and then actually managed them. The first time I remember hearing Theo Foley's name was as Charlton manager, and this would be the early 70s. I think they were a Division 3 side during his time there. He
was there with, was it Eddie Firmini? Was it Eddie Firmini?
Yeah. South African Italian South African.
Yeah.
But Foley wasn't. I think Foley's, the interesting thing about Foley's career, I mean, there's an obituary in the Irish Times where they described it as a player. He came so close. The Irish side apparently came close to qualifying for the '66 World Cup, but didn't make it. So it's so close yet so far. Injury took away a career, and I think you'd possibly say the same about him as a manager, because although at Charlton in the early 70s, they weren't successful on the field. He actually brought in some major Charlton names, Mike Flanagan, Colin Powell and Derek Howes being the three main names there that have become, part and parcel of Charlton folklore, before Foley was actually sacked in 1974. Which brings us on to his time at the Den, of course, Neil.
Was he sacked because of the Who concert?
I think they were broke. I think they
were really in bad financial straits, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I remember going to the Valley in the early 70s, and it was, really, it was a huge space, a huge ground, but it was quite literally falling apart in places. The Who concert was I think, an attempt to try and generate some money. But I mean, certainly, I think his job there as manager was to try and balance the books. So I think they were having to sell as fast as they were signing. But he certainly had an eye for a player, that's for sure. And then he moved on. In '75, he actually joined Gordon Jago at the Den. That brought us on to one of my favourite ever seasons, 1975-76, because, as I think I've said on a couple of other shows, that was my first ever successful Millwall season. I'd started going in '72 on the back end of, the kind of heroic failure to get promoted at the end of 1971-72 season. So from there, it's fairly much season on season decline until, we had been relegated to Division 3, and this was a promotion-winning season and a wonderful season too, Neil, to be part of. When you're 14, 15, you kind of live a campaign, don't you? You keep track of the results week in, week out. You write them on your chart on the wall, and you have your shoot kind of
your shoot ladders,
shoot ladders. And I lived this season, and it's even now. It's if you ask me for my favourite ever season, I'd probably keep coming back to this one because it was that first first touch of success.
Pippin Palace to the third place promotion spot.
It had everything, you had a team with names like, we've spoken before about Trevor Lee and Phil Walker, two truly great signings made by Gordon Jago, but, Theo Foley was his assistant. And you got a sense that Foley's influence behind the scenes brought together this team that struggled at the start of the season. And then I think we were mid-table around about Christmas. I think we kind of ignited from January '76 onwards to promotion in May, and it was just one of those roller coaster seasons where with an eventual triumph, there is a happy ending at the end of the fairy story, and to be part of that at the time was just uplifting, and I'll never forget the season.
Yeah, like you say, it's always about the relationship, isn't it? Managers always need that sounding board, and you always need the right sounding board. I know that sounds very strange, but just taking it to a few seasons ahead, Addy McLeod became Scotland manager. Yeah. He had a choice of who he could have as his assistant, and the guy he chose, he could have had Jock Stein, he could have had a few other big names, was not so much a yes man, but could never really influence Addy McLeod's decision making. And a good example of that was the Iran game, when they were talking about should Graham Souness be included, and the assistant said when he left the room, Graham Souness was in the team, and Addy McLeod changed his mind because he didn't quite trust his assistant manager. So you've really the role of assistant manager, I think, is a really not undermined, but it's underappreciated. Just what an important part they play in the cog of things, and I think we're seeing that at the moment. With the departure of Callum Davidson, it just upsets the apple cart ever so slightly, and suddenly, if they have a bit of advice on where to change things, it takes a while to build a relationship with an assistant manager, and Clough had the same thing when Peter Taylor initially retired and then came back as Derby manager. It's finding that assistant, which is why they always tend to have the same assistants throughout their career.
Yeah, I mean it's a critical role. I mean the manager by the very nature of the role, you have to be, you're picking and choosing. You're applying preference to one player over another, and sometimes that may not always seem fair on the individuals concerned. So they need somewhere to go. So the managers always has to be, the great managers, in my opinion, they're always slightly removed from the fray. I mean, I'm thinking obviously of the sort of Sir Alex Ferguson's, for example, slightly austere, not quite godlike, but they're not part of the group. They're not part of the to a level they're not part of the day-by-day banter. Whereas the assistant, I think, is the link between the group and the manager, and he's there to do the old classic arm around the shoulder and lend an ear when someone has something to say. So it's a massively important role. Certainly everything I've picked up online about Theo Foley was the warmth and his willingness to work with players and to nurture them where they needed it. It seems to be a common theme, whichever club he was at. That seems to be the thing that comes across about them.
Yeah. I mean, they used to take training a lot, didn't they? And, the assistant managers were like the coaches. They used to do all the training and, they used to kind of coerce the best out of players. And I think he was, one of those kind of coaches, stroke assistant managers who would try and get the best out of people like Lee and Walker, for example. They came from non-league, and there's that famous photo with the hose pipe, etc.
Yeah.
You see him as kind of the guy that, tries to get new players embedded into the team. And he's the guy that like you say, the players went to if they had a problem. But, you can't undermine his role within Jago's success, I think, because, I think he was part and parcel of what they brought to the club in terms of people talk about transformations these days, digital transformation, club transformation. But, they brought kind of like a cultural transformation. They had to in the previous years of we were so near and everyone kept going back to that season. They needed kind of like a fresh rethink and I hate to use the phrase a reboot from the Benny Fenton era of we almost did it, now we've got to rebuild and go again, rather than just think about what might have been, should we say.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, this would be a theme possibly later on in Theo Foley's career, but he worked with some great names. I mean, Gordon Jago, I think it's sometimes easy to forget, Jago arrived with quite a reputation in the game for being a forward-thinking manager, not just in terms of playing style, but how clubs were, constituted and what they were for, if you want to put it that way. And it's interesting that Jago moved on to America, where I think he remains to this day as a kind of a new football pioneer, if you like, where you can create things from scratch rather than try to change tradition, as English and British football has always been. But I mean, after his time with the Lions, he's moved on to QPR as a coach, where he's worked with Terry Venables. I mean, the big names keep cropping up through Theo Foley's career, don't they? Players, names that are major figures.
Yeah, I mean, before he went to QPR, he was caretaker manager at Millwall.
Yeah, briefly.
And although the results didn't go his way, I think we lost 4 on the spin. But that's like everything that happens in football. When you lose the manager, you sometimes either have a bounce or you have a dip in form, don't you, depending on how they go. Yeah. And I know he resigned because I think we went for Harry Haslam.
Luton manager.
It was Luton manager, but then went on to Sheffield United and signed Alex Sabella. The Argentine.
Yes. Yeah.
So you can see why I didn't fancy Calvo Lane. I think he was a bit insulted that Millwall weren't going to offer him the job, or they were touting for other. I say other business, but that makes them sound like they're prostituting themselves, which potentially they were. But ended up with Pecci, who wasn't the most attack-minded of managers. Whereas maybe Theo Foley, had been given a bit more time, could have produced, should we say, the goods. But I think we were in quite a bad way relegation-wise, weren't we, at the time?
Yeah, we were struggling.
We weren't having a good season for whatever reason. Well, the main reason was the Panorama programme. And,
many like reasons. The club was struggling at that time. And it may have been interesting. I mean, just reading a couple of the obituaries and articles about Theo, I mean, talking about, again, his management at Charlton in the early 70s, he constructed a side, as it's put, it was like attack-minded. It was go forward, get the goals, and hopefully score more than you concede, which in some ways is quite a Millwall mentality in many ways, although, some will say you got, if you don't concede any, you won't lose the game. So certainly I think his mindset was always to get the ball forward and to, produce the kind of champagne football in and around the opposition's box. Interestingly, while he was at QPR, he's also, become friendly with the young Jules Graham, who I think was also working as a coach at that time at the Queen's Park Rangers. And they would also, come together again in 1982 in some very desperate times, Neil, for Millwall, back at Coldblow Lane. We've mentioned this on a couple of nostalgia shows over the break, but I don't think you can really underplay the dire straits that Millwall Football Club was in 1982-83. I mean, we were staring down the barrel of relegation to the 4th division and possibly even non-existence as a football club at that point.
Yeah, I mean, football was in a bad place altogether, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
We mentioned the Clough and Taylor partnership, but it's the same sort of thing, Theo Foley went to QPR, found a like-minded coach in George Graham, who was looking after their youth team. And, it was the same, conversations over a cup of tea in the canteen about, attacking styles and, the way you should play football and, how you get the best out of players. And I think we were very fortunate that we managed to get someone young and ambitious. He wanted to move into management when no one else would potentially touch Millwall.
No.
And it worked out for all parties. Who are you going to have? Well, at the time, George Graham, best known, like we said, being Arsenal's double winning side, playing for Man United in the National. Yeah, he's done it on the field, but hadn't really done it as a coach. I know QPR's youth team was successful. I think, yes, Millwall were able to take a chance, but the fact that George Graham applied was quite good. But I read a funny article online about when that happened. But Theo Foley went to George Graham and said, "You can't go to Millwall, they'll eat you alive." And he was trying to talk him out of it, not realising he was going to take him with him the following week.
You're listening to Achtung Millwall.
So you won't fit in. You don't know the Millwall way. And
no, I mean it was a wonderful achievement. The George Graham and Theo Foley double acts not only saved us from relegation to the by the skin of our teeth, incidentally, listeners. I mean, it was a close run thing for us not to be relegated in 1982-83. And then they, over the season that followed and into 84-85, they developed one of the great Millwall sides, really, to win promotion from the third division. You look at that team that got promoted. There's some iconic names in there, Neil, aren't there? Including John Fashanu, Chulakovsky, names, Cusack, names that are, that are still spoken about to this day amongst Millwall.
Yeah, I think the key thing as well is that the team came in, and we joke about it, but it won 2 trophies. It won the Football League trophy in the standard 5-a-side with very much fringe players. But again, I think one of Foley's real skills was identifying the youth team players like McCleary and Sheringham. Because I know George Graham wasn't particularly keen on Sheringham, trying to get rid of him. But you also had an assistant manager there that saw something that could convince the manager not to sell a player or a key asset further down the line. So they came in. They lifted the club immediately, but I think part of the secret of George Graham's success was that Theo Foley had been at Millwall during bad times and good times and knew the club. And I think that's key. We've had managers that come in who think they can do it because they've done everything in the past, or young managers like Lomas, for example, who for his West Ham connections was never going to get the forgiveness from the fans. He was always going to be in a hide into nothing. But to be fair to him, he came in. And I would always put Lomas above Holloway as a manager. And Holloway'd been there, seen it, done it, and thought he could just breeze in and do what he'd always done, which was basically talk bollocks in a press conference after losing. But, Foley came in and you could give Graham the guidance that he probably needed. Otherwise, another assistant manager, he could have made a lot of mistakes and it could have been a lot different. I doubt it because, Graham went on to be successful elsewhere. But, you've always got to start somewhere, don't you? It takes a run of bad games before your managerial career is over.
It's interesting, the success. I mean, from the Theo Foley perspective, he'd had success already with Gordon Jago. He's had success with George Graham here at Millwall, getting promotion to the second division in 85, and a quarter final, which obviously would, in the FA Cup, which would not go well for us, but that was still an achievement. But I mean, to move then on to Arsenal and produce probably one of the iconic Arsenal sides of all time, winning the league title in 88-89, and the last kick of the season, pretty much, wasn't it, out there at Anfield, and to spot and develop players that are still mentioned in Arsenal folklore is an incredible achievement. I think it's to be an assistant, on 3 occasions where you've achieved success and you leave behind a legacy where fans of those clubs still talk about those sides. It must be what the game's all about, in truth. I know money's always part of it, but to leave behind the like the Spurs slogan, the glory, isn't it? That's what you leave behind in the end. That's what they'll be talking about in the years to come.
Funny enough, one of the mottos of William Hill was "Leave a legacy." And, that's what Foley did with George Graham. They left a legacy at Arsenal. They left a legacy at Millwall.
Yeah.
I know everyone, when they talk about George Graham, they talk about Arsenal. But his success at Arsenal was it's a mirror image of what he did at Millwall. He came in won their first cup in years, the League Cup. I think it was their first cup since the FA Cup in '79.
Yeah.
And that gave them the time. And obviously, Arsenal fans started success to then build a team that actually won the league 2 years later. It's a very, the mirror image to that and the success they had at Millwall is quite remarkable, which is not commented on a lot, but it kind of like followed the same pattern, very much followed the same pattern. And you had youth players coming through as well. Arsenal, they went in and they got rid of established names like Tommy Caton and a few others, who'd been in the Arsenal team for years and kind of rebuilt it from scratch. And they talk about the back four, but, they built that back four by, yes, they brought in, Tony Adams, but, they made some good signings in Lee Dixon, Steve Bold, etc. To get the right pieces of the jigsaw in place to build upon that success. But, it takes a brave manager to come in and then just clear out the big names, which is what they did at Arsenal. And I think it's what Arsenal needed at the time. And, when you're rebuilding a side, a manager always needs that sounding block on who to buy, who to go out and scout. Because without that, it all quickly falls apart. I don't know how good David Livermore is, but Neil Harris seems to take him everywhere with him. Whether he's got pictures of Neil Harris in compromising positions, who knows? But, it's kind of... I think David Livermore is the archetypal kind of assistant manager in that he will never be in the spotlight, but he will be that sounding board that the man in the spotlight needs in order to get things done on the pitch. I mean, a prime example was when Morrison scored the winner against Bradford. The cameras cut to the bench and Neil Harris is deep in conversation with David Livermore while everyone else is celebrating. So, it's kind of, what do we do to, do we make changes now? Do we keep it tight, etc.? You may react to something, and the idea of the system manager is to keep the cool head when everyone else about them is losing theirs. And I think he did that role pretty well for George Graham, because I think he went to Leeds and then later Tottenham with him after he went back to management. Didn't he?
Took him to Spurs. He managed at Northampton, and I think he coached around Southend and Fulham, I believe, as well. But he finished up back at Tottenham with George Graham. One thing that struck me, just I had a quick flick through the Twitter account for Theo Foley's book, which is called Theo Give Us a Ball. It's on Amazon. It looks like a really interesting book. I may order it, have a read of it now. Because
it was written by his son, I believe,
Yeah, who's sadly passed away too, which is quite tragic this year, I understand. So a very difficult year for the Foley family. But one thing that struck me looking through the Theo Foley Twitter account, because obviously in this modern world, this lives on past your mortal existence. Your Twitter account still carries on. But the repeat concern and interest in the development of youngsters is a repeat theme that I picked up looking through Theo's post. I can't remember the name of an Arsenal youngster, but some fans were digging out a youngster. I can't remember the boy's name now off the top of my head. And Theo's basically saying this is not what the club used to be about. It was always about the nurturing of players like David Rocastle being the classic example, and others. And he's, Foley was also involved at, I think, Cray Wanderers. He was known to be popping down there to work with the youngsters. It's just an interesting role because classic footballers don't come from nowhere. They have to be brought through the youth ranks. They have to be Teddy Sheringham, good example from the Millwall perspective. They need someone to nurture them along in difficult times. And I'm sure, Foley, you've mentioned Sheringham already, but I'm sure Foley was part and parcel of Millwall persisting with a player that would later become, I'd argue, one of the club legends of all time. It needs someone somewhere to just put their arm around the shoulder sometimes and talk a boy through a tough situation.
Yeah, I mean, even going back to the first stint at Millwall, you look at the youth team that won the Youth Cup. The season after they left, I think Foley was key in that as well as Gordon Boland, the secretary as well. I think, they had, a lot of, should we say, their stamp over that team. This team, Millwall, we would have youth players come through, but not to the extent that we had in, later on, 78, 79. Obviously, we needed them because we'd sold everyone else and we didn't have anyone else to play in the team. But, when you think about it, I think Phil Coleman's, he commented online, and I know Merv's written a great book about the team. But Phil Coleman said, someone posted a picture and he said, 9 out of the 11 names in the lineup, they all went on to play for the first team, which is remarkable when you think about it. But the fact they could go on and play for the youth team and then go on and carve out a career in professional football says a lot about the players or the managers that brought them through at the earlier ages. So, you look at the success they had at 16, 17, but it was the persistence and, the eye for a player at 14, 15, used to make players back then. These days it's different. You have these academies where, most clubs are honest, even Millwall are honest, you will take 20 players per year. Of those 20 players, maybe one will make it because it's just, it's not because they're rubbish or because they don't have the talent. It's just, you need that dedication, you need the commitment, you need the breaks, etc. You need the luck. And it's very rare where all of them come through at the same time these days, simply because there isn't the opportunities for them, because it's a squad game and you have your large squad, so less chance of you players coming through. Millwall seem to be returning to that era of youth.
Which is good to see.
We've had quite a few on the bench this season, haven't we?
Yeah.
Breaking through.
Yeah.
We had Muller on the bench.
Mitchell on Saturday.
Yeah. Dad's army of "Can you hear me, Muller?" But you've got all these players, and they're coming through now. And it's good to see because we haven't had players like that come through for years. Since the Cahill, Reed, Eiffel days, and even then, Cahill and Eiffel came from other clubs, so we didn't nurture them fully, but we still had players around them that came out like Bertram and a few others, and we need that. We need that, not so much a lifeline, but we need this production line. We need to know that our youth policy is working to produce players that can get into the first team. Otherwise, what's the point of having a youth team? And I know some teams have completely disbanded their academies and their youth system. And they've done that in the past as well. Like Newcastle did it, which is how we got Huckabee on loan. So it's kind of, what do? Do you kind of like get rid of it, or do you persist with it? And you should only really persist with it if it's paying dividends. And Millwall's Youth Academy hasn't really paid dividends. There's one or two that have come through, but not like to the fore. I mean, you can mention John Marquis, but John Marquis has carved out a pretty good, decent career at lower league level. But it's not like your Teddy Sheringham's or your Tim Kaye's or Stephen Reed, which is not fair on John Marquis. But at the same time, it kind of reflects where Millwall's youth policy actually is, that we can churn out decent professionals like Sid Nelson as well, who can carve out a career and can do a job within the team.
Newport or wherever he is now.
But we still need those players that will become part and parcel of the team going forward, so which you can build around, which every club needs really, especially at our level. And Theo Foley was one of those men who used to get the players to come to the fruition, as it were. We've mentioned Walker, who was signed, but still needed an arm put around them. We mentioned the Sheringhams and McClearys. It's no coincidence that some of our best youth policies and players that have come through from non-league, etc., came in the era where Foley was assistant manager. I think he had a lot to do with that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a description of him here as a proper football man. I think that's a certain kind of type of person that kind of dedicates their life to the game, and I think Theo Foley was just such an individual, both as a player and then in management and coaching and assistant management. I mean, to be part of two of the great seasons for me as a Millwall supporter, and then from there to progress on to, I would imagine, for many Arsenal fans, one of possibly the season of all, when they won the Football League in such dramatic circumstances. That's a huge achievement for a football career, Neil. I'd say that must be,
yes.
It's
he left his mark. So you always leave a legacy, and he did. He was successful in at least 3 different clubs in 3 different eras.
It's quite something.
4 of you include Millwall twice. Which says a lot. But my ever-minding memory of him, funny enough, because it sounds weird to say, but years ago, you never heard footballers talk.
No,
you rarely
didn't.
heard managers talk.
No, very
You
rare.
never heard assistant managers. And so when Theo Foley he used to be on Capital Radio and used to kind of summarise games with Jonathan Pearce. The first time I heard Theo Foley, first thing that struck me was, that's not how I thought he would sound. Because you look at him and you think he's got a real rough, deep, kind of booming voice. And it wasn't like that at all. It was like this Irish slant to it, and he was very softly spoken, which kind of didn't really go with the figure he portrayed as a player. And kind of when you looked at pictures of him in Shoot magazine and things like that, but it was quite ironic that his tones, and he was very eloquent as well, which you
Absolutely,
never associate with footballers at all. But it is a noticeable difference.
Interesting. I mean, just doing a little bit of research for this, I mean, look through some old newspaper articles. You're right. He's sidelined. Really, he never made it at the main thrust of his career. But he's sidelined as a media personality, I suppose you'd call him, on the various London radio stations. But also done a bit of journalism. Some of the Irish newspapers had articles by Theo Foley, and as you say, an eloquent, an eloquent man, and that's not always what you expect in football, rightly or wrongly. I've just got a couple of quotes I want to finish us on, Neil. There's a great tweet to Paul Foley, who sadly passed away. This was Theo's son, who helped co-write the book Theo Give Us a Ball. But there's a tribute from someone called Lou Robinson. Said they just finished reading Paul's book about his dad's life. It was a great read. Lou Robinson was an apprentice at Millwall in the mid-80s, and what always struck me was your dad's enthusiasm every day, which was infectious. Totally recommend the book, which I think is quite a nice tribute. And then one final paragraph, which is actually a lift from the book itself. Theo Foley's words, talking about playing and managing at Millwall. He describes this as having some very good players, playing expansive, attacking football in front of a passionate crowd. No matter what anyone says about Millwall fans, they are the best in the land when they're on your side. I love the feeling of belonging and the unity straight away. Real people, real football fans. And that's a really nice way to an epitaph, I think, for Theo Foley, who was involved in our 2 promotion seasons, 75-76, 84-85, and then went on to win the Football League and League Cup with Arsenal in 1988-89. Theo Foley, 1937 to 2020, A Life in Football. Thank you, Neil, for your involvement in the show. Really appreciate it, mate.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Achtung Millwall. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a cheeky little review. Arrivederci Millwall. Till next time.